Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. We start this afternoon in Washington, D.C. with Representative Liz Cheney's ousting from her GOP leadership post. The persistent Trump critic was voted out of the party's leadership behind closed doors. She says she's, quote, committed to going forward based on truth.
I will do everything I can to ensure that the former president never again gets anywhere near the Oval Office. We have seen the danger that he continues to provoke with his language. We have seen his lack of commitment and dedication to the Constitution. And I think it's very important that we make sure whomever we elect is somebody who will be faithful to the Constitution.
Well, members of the GOP are also building criticism of President Biden's plans for vast new federal spending on infrastructure and social programs. That criticism getting a boost from a surge in inflation. And Biden meeting with the top 4 congressional leaders in an effort to bridge gaps between their legislative priorities. We got a lot to break down, and joining me now to help make sense of it all is Bloomberg Opinion's senior columnist Tim O'Brien and Bloomberg government congressional reporter Emily Wilkins, who's on Capitol Hill. Hey, big thank you to both of you for being here. Tim, I want to start with you and just your reaction to the ousting of Liz Cheney. Is the future of the Republican Party, is it Donald Trump?
Well, I think the future of the Republican Party is going to be Trumpism in some fashion. Whether or not that actually inhabits the body of Donald Trump is a separate issue. You know, it's pretty extraordinary that what Liz Cheney just said was our party should recognize that the truth is important. Our party should recognize that the Constitution is important, and that Donald Trump's actions showed that he didn't really embrace either one of those things. And I think regardless of ideology or policy positions, both parties should, in an ideal world, be pro-truth and pro-Constitution. They're very core values that I think are apolitical. So the next question is, why are they willing to embrace Trumpism? And I think it's because they've discovered that it's a very sure path to power. If we're defining Trumpism as a sort of constant wheel of propaganda that plays off social divisions, embraces more overt forms of bigotry or racism, and really puts policy aside in the place of just grasping and retaining power. Trump has proven that works and it's effective, and I think that's why you see people, like Ted Cruz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Josh Hawley, all Elise Stenovec, embracing this even in the absence of Trump. And I think that's the existential crisis facing the party going forward is, do they fall down on the sort of Cheney-Romney side of this, or do they fall down on the Hawley-Stenovec side?
Yeah, it certainly seems like, at least now until 2022, they've chosen the Trump side at this point. Emily, come on in here because I'm interested what you're hearing from Republicans on Capitol Hill right now. How are they so easily able to build up support to oust Cheney from her position?
Well, an interesting thing to keep in mind here is that we had this very similar vote back in February after Cheney voted as one of 10 Republicans in the House to impeach Trump. And at that point, 2/3 of the caucus, they did a private secret ballot, and 2/3 of the caucus said, we want Cheney to remain on as conference chair. We are comfortable having her in leadership, even though that she has come out and opposed Trump in such a major way. The issue, they now say, is that Cheney has done so again and again and again. House Republicans talk a lot about messaging. If Congresswoman Cheney steps up and calls out President Trump for his false claims about the 2020 election, then when they go back home to their districts, they are asked questions again about how they feel about 2020, whether or not they believe the president. And this has really put some of the Republicans in what they've called an uncomfortable spot. They want Cheney to stay on message. They don't want to sort of be constantly asked questions about 2020 because there's a sense that if they do, that's going to jeopardize their ability to win in 2022.
Well, let's talk about 2022, Tim. I mean, is this all about solidifying power and attempting to win back the House and Senate in 2022? Is that why the GOP is embracing Trump?
Of course, that's absolutely the reason. And that idea will have to get road tested. It's not entirely clear that they're going to be able to hold on to majorities or, recapture a majority in the House by a full embrace of Trumpism. But clearly the House leadership has made that decision. I think Mitch McConnell, is in a different and possibly more difficult place than Kevin McCarthy. But they're clearly trying to figure out what messaging works for their, not just the Trump base, but the base beyond Trump. Trump's core base is not enough to win elections. So they're going to have to move beyond that to get there. So they're walking a tightrope here. And I think that explains all of this infighting and all of these conflicting messages about what the party stands for.
So, Emily, what does that mean with President Biden's attempt to actually find some sort of bridge between his legislative priorities and his agenda and Republicans? If Republicans are still holding on to the party of Trump, and you still have many elected Republicans who really refuse to acknowledge that President Biden won a free and fair election.
Well, President Biden said before going into a meeting today with sort of the big four powerhouses in Congress that he is still seeking bipartisanship. And it's not just this one meeting today. I mean, tomorrow Biden's going to be meeting with 6 Republican senators on a potential path forward on that infrastructure plan. And behind the scenes, the White House has been making hundreds of calls to congressional offices and staffers trying to get them on board. I mean, this involves the Democrats as well. There are a number of voters who elected President Biden and voted for him because they thought that he would find ways to bring Democrats and Republicans together and have that display of bipartisanship. So that's definitely something that President Biden wants. However, on the other hand, Democrats want to make sure that they're not giving so much to Republicans in negotiations that they're not able to pass a robust package that's going to satisfy their own base. And I think this is just a key thing to think about when you think about 2022. It's not a presidential year, it's a midterm. And that means that the voters that are going to be coming out are a little bit different than what you see in those major presidential years. It tends to be more of the party's core base and core supporters. And I think going back today to that vote on Cheney and that solidification towards Trump, that is who Kevin McCarthy and Republicans are trying to make sure that they have in their corner when the midterms roll around.
We'll enter President Biden's ambitious agenda when it comes to what he wants to do. Tim, you and our colleague Nir Kaysar have a new column out this morning, and it opens with Ronald Reagan, a quotation that hard to believe at this point has been more than 40 years. Quote, "I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." President Reagan, of course, saying that decades ago. What does President Biden need to do to convince the American people and indeed Republicans that the government can help, especially to get to the other side of this pandemic and get some of his ambitious plans through?
Well, I think he has to make the case that the American Jobs Plan and the Families Plan, are both about economic growth and constructive, positive solutions for the economy and for a broad swath of Americans who will benefit from these programs. I think that's the first case they have to make. The second case is, how do they finance that rationally? And I think that's where I think critics of the plan are going to come in. We're in an era of concern about inflation, concern about excessive federal debt, although that is not a new argument either. And as you mentioned, that was really the Reagan mantra, is that government can only create problems. It's not the solution. And I think the challenge here for Biden, and it's a generational challenge, is can you show that a sophisticated, finely tuned government program that does things like modernize and reinforce the country's infrastructure, demonstrate that government can be a positive force in people's lives? And then can you also make the case that there's a way for the federal government to pay for that doesn't leave other people feeling either beggared or feel like you're saddling the government with unmanageable debt? I think the case can be made for that as well, but they have a hard path in front of them.
How much harder is that path, Tim, today because of that surge in inflation and the dismal jobs report that we saw on Friday, saying, hey, and there's many critics who are saying, hey, Biden's plans aren't working right now?
Well, you could read Friday's job report to actually say the economy's not back on firm footing yet. There's a big debate over why people aren't taking these jobs, and it's 1 month of data. I think more information needs to come out on the jobs front. But one read on that is that there is still a lot of tremors that are undermining people in the workplace, and that our work is not done in terms of shoring up the U.S. economy. On the inflation report, a lot of the inflation numbers today, you're comparing them to a year ago when the pandemic had just begun to tear up the economy. The numbers that rose in this recent reading of today, hotel, transportation, and auto, undoubtedly surging demand for those things coming out of the pandemic. And core inflation, it's not yet clear whether core inflation is going to rise as dramatically. So I think we need a couple of readings more around all of this data before we really know. But this will add to the debate about what sensible government involvement with the economy is.
Yeah, Emily, I want to end with you. What are Republicans saying about the latest slew of economic data that we've gotten over the last few days? How are they latching onto it?
I mean, for Republicans, this plays right into what they have already been saying since really we passed the coronavirus stimulus bill back several months ago in March. There were concerns then about inflation. There are concerns now about inflation. And previously you saw the Biden administration as well as Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen come out and say, you know what, we don't think there's going to be a big bump in inflation. We don't think this is going to be an issue. You've heard the Federal Reserve say there might be a little bit of inflation, but then it will even out. But now Republicans are getting data and numbers to back up that argument that they're making. And I bet that's certainly something that's going to be discussed at the White House today, as well as negotiations continue about how big this package needs to be.
Bloomberg Opinion's Tim O'Brien, also Bloomberg Government's Emily Wilkins. A big thank you to both of you for your time and for joining us this afternoon on Quick Take. Really appreciate it.